Hey everyone, welcome back to USA News. I'm your host, and today we're diving into one of the most tense and dangerous geopolitical situations developing right now in 2026. We're talking about the escalating military crisis between the United States and Iran, the development of Iran's hypersonic missile program, and what it means for American naval power in the Middle East. Now, over the past few years, we've seen tensions between the US and Iran reach unprecedented levels, especially with the Trump administration returning to office and taking an aggressive posture toward Iran. We've seen threats, we've seen military buildups, and we've seen Iran developing new weapon systems that could fundamentally change the balance of power in the region. Today, we're going to break down exactly what's happening, why Iran is developing these hypersonic missiles, what threat they pose to American naval forces like the USS Abraham Lincoln, and what the implications are for global security in 2026 and beyond. This is not just theoretical. This is happening right now, and the consequences could reshape the entire Middle East and put American military personnel at risk. If you want to understand the most critical geopolitical development of 2026, if you want to know what these hypersonic missiles actually are and why they're so dangerous, and if you want to understand how we got to this point of escalation, then stick with me because this is the complete analysis you need to know. Let's start by understanding where we are right now in early 2026 and how we got here. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been hostile for over 4 decades, going back to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. But the situation has intensified dramatically over the past few years. When Donald Trump took office in 2025, he made clear that his administration would take a much harder line against Iran than the Biden administration had. Trump had always opposed the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, and during his first administration he withdrew from it, imposing maximum pressure sanctions on Iran. Now in his second term, he's signaling that he intends to continue and intensify that pressure. The Trump administration has been making inflammatory statements about Iran, has been increasing military presence in the Persian Gulf, has been threatening military action, and has been coordinating with Israel and regional allies to contain and confront Iran. At the same time, Iran has been responding to this American pressure by accelerating its military development programs, particularly its missile programs. Iran has invested heavily in developing ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and now most concerning, hypersonic missiles. These weapons represent a fundamental shift in the military balance because hypersonic missiles are extremely difficult to defend against with current technology. They travel at speeds exceeding Mach 5, which is 5 times the speed of sound. At these speeds, traditional air defense systems struggle to detect and intercept them. They can maneuver unpredictably, making them even harder to counter. For the first time, Iran has developed the capability to potentially threaten American military assets that were previously considered relatively safe, including aircraft carriers like the USS Abraham Lincoln. Let's talk about the USS Abraham Lincoln specifically because it's become a symbol of American naval power and also a symbol of the tensions in the region. The USS Abraham Lincoln is a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, one of the most powerful warships in the world. It carries approximately 65 aircraft, including fighter jets, helicopters, and surveillance planes. It has a crew of about 5,000 sailors and officers. The ship displaces over 100,000 tons and is powered by nuclear reactors, allowing it to operate for extended periods without refueling. It's equipped with advanced radar systems, sophisticated combat systems, and numerous defensive weapons. Historically, American aircraft carriers have been incredibly difficult to threaten. They operate with protective escorts, including guided missile cruisers and destroyers that provide air defense. They have sophisticated radar that can detect aircraft and missiles at great distances, and they have interceptor missiles that can shoot down attacking aircraft or incoming missiles. The carrier strike group around them provides layers of defense that have made carriers seem nearly invulnerable. But hypersonic missiles change this equation fundamentally. A hypersonic missile traveling at 5 times the speed of sound gives defenders only minutes, sometimes just seconds, to detect it, track it, and launch a defensive response. The Patriot air defense systems, the Standard missiles, and other traditional air defense systems were designed for slower targets. They struggle with hypersonic weapons. This is why military analysts around the world are deeply concerned about hypersonic missile development. It could render some of the most expensive military hardware in the world vulnerable in ways we haven't seen before. Now, Let's understand Iran's situation and why they've been developing these weapons. Iran is a country of over 88 million people with a sophisticated military-industrial complex. However, Iran's conventional military is substantially weaker than the American military. If there were a direct conventional war between the United States and Iran, the United States would almost certainly prevail in terms of air power, naval power, and advanced technology. Iran knows this, so Iran's strategy has been to develop asymmetrical capabilities, weapons and tactics that can impose costs on a more powerful enemy, that can make an American military intervention more costly and more difficult. Iran has developed a large ballistic missile arsenal, with missiles like the Shahab series that can strike targets across the region and potentially reach European targets. Iran has developed cruise missiles that can be launched from ships, aircraft, and ground-based platforms. Iran has developed unmanned drones, some of which can carry weapons and surveillance equipment. And most recently, Iran has been developing hypersonic missiles that represent the cutting edge of their military technology. From Iran's perspective, these weapons are defensive. They're deterrents against American military action. Iran has been threatened repeatedly by the United States. American planes have bombed Iranian targets. American drones have killed Iranian military commanders, most notably General Qasem Soleimani in 2020. American sanctions have devastated Iran's economy. American military presence surrounds Iran on all sides. From Iran's strategic perspective, developing weapons that can deter American military action is a rational response to these threats. The hypersonic missiles are particularly important because they could theoretically be used to strike American military assets, including aircraft carriers that are operating in and around the Persian Gulf. The development of these missiles is meant to raise the cost of any American military action and to make clear to the Trump administration that attacking Iran would be far more costly and dangerous than they might assume. Let's talk about what a hypersonic missile actually is and how it works. A missile is classified as hypersonic if it travels at speeds of Mach 5 or higher, which means at least 5 times the speed of sound, or roughly 3,800 miles per hour or more. There are two main types of hypersonic weapons that militaries are developing. The first is a hypersonic glide vehicle, which is launched on a rocket or ballistic missile and then separates and glides toward its target at hypersonic speeds. The second is a hypersonic cruise missile, which uses a special engine called a scramjet to propel itself at hypersonic speeds. The advantage of hypersonic weapons is multiple. First, they're so fast that defensive systems have minimal time to react. Second, their trajectory can be unpredictable. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles, which follow a predictable arc, hypersonic weapons can maneuver during flight, changing their trajectory and making it much harder to predict where they'll go. Third, they can carry conventional or nuclear warheads. Fourth, they can be launched from a variety of platforms, from ships, from aircraft, from ground-based platforms. This makes them extremely flexible weapons. The downside for defenders is that traditional air defense systems simply aren't effective against hypersonic targets. Missiles designed to intercept aircraft and slower missiles don't work against targets moving at 5 times the speed of sound. This is why military planners around the world, including American military planners, are deeply concerned about hypersonic weapons. It essentially makes the defenses that we've built over the past 70 years potentially obsolete. If you're defending an aircraft carrier and a hypersonic missile can reach you in minutes with an unpredictable trajectory, then the carrier becomes vulnerable in a way it's never been vulnerable before. So what exactly is the threat that Iran's hypersonic missiles pose? Intelligence reports suggest that Iran has been testing hypersonic missiles, and some reports indicate they may have successfully tested weapons with hypersonic capabilities. If Iran has indeed developed operational hypersonic missiles, then they have developed a weapon that could theoretically be used against American military assets, including aircraft carriers. An American aircraft carrier operating in the Persian Gulf would be within range of Iran's hypersonic missiles. If Iran were to launch such a missile, the consequences could be catastrophic. A hit from a large missile could cause severe damage to a carrier, potentially killing hundreds of sailors and disabling the ship. Even if the missile were intercepted, the attempt to intercept could fail, and the consequences would be enormous. This is why military analysts have been warning about the vulnerability of aircraft carriers to advanced missiles. Throughout history, weapon systems that previously seemed invulnerable have eventually been challenged by new technology. Battleships were the dominant naval weapon for centuries, but when aircraft carriers were developed, battleships became vulnerable and obsolete. Now, aircraft carriers may be facing a similar challenge from hypersonic missiles. The Trump administration and the U.S. Navy are very much aware of this threat. They're developing new air defense systems. They're developing electronic warfare capabilities. They're developing tactics to counter hypersonic weapons. But it takes takes time to develop and deploy new defensive systems. In the meantime, the vulnerability exists. This vulnerability is part of what's making the situation so tense in 2026. American military planners are aware that if a conflict were to break out between the United States and Iran, the consequences could be far worse than they would have been even 5 or 10 years ago. This raises the stakes of the confrontation and makes miscalculation even more dangerous. Now let's talk about the Trump administration's Iran policy in 2026 and how it's contributing to the escalation. Trump has made clear that he views Iran as an existential threat to American interests in the Middle East. He's made statements suggesting that military action against Iran might be necessary. He's increased military presence in the region, deploying additional air assets, additional naval forces, and coordinating military exercises with allies like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Israel, which sees Iran as its most significant existential threat, is also taking an increasingly aggressive posture. There have been Israeli strikes on Iranian targets in the region, including alleged strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and military installations. These Israeli actions, which are generally understood to have American support, or at least American acquiescence, are infuriating the Iranian leadership. From Iran's perspective, they're being attacked by Israel with American backing, they're being surrounded by American military forces, and they're being subjected to brutal economic sanctions. The natural Iranian response is to accelerate their military development, including their missile programs. So we have a dynamic where American military pressure pushes Iran to develop better weapons, which then makes American military planners more nervous, which then leads to more American military pressure, which then leads Iran to develop even more advanced weapons. This is a classic security dilemma, where each side's defensive measures are perceived as threatening by the other side, leading to an escalatory spiral. It's the kind of dynamic that historically leads to wars, sometimes even wars that neither side initially wanted. Both the Trump administration and the Iranian leadership seem to be locked in a confrontational posture that's difficult to back away from without losing face. Domestically, Trump benefits politically from a tough stance on Iran. It appeals to his base. It appeals to his allies in the military-industrial complex who benefit from military spending. It appeals to his allies in Israel. Domestically in Iran, the hardline leadership benefits from an aggressive posture toward the United States. It allows them to blame the United States for Iran's economic problems. It unites the country against an external enemy. So both sides have domestic political incentives to maintain a confrontational posture. The situation is made even more dangerous by the risk of miscalculation. In a situation where both sides are on high alert, where weapons systems are being tested and deployed, where military exercises are happening, there's always the risk of an accident, a misinterpretation, or an incident that spirals out of control. During previous crises between the US and Iran, there have been moments of extreme danger. In 2019, after the American drone strike that killed General Soleimani, Iran retaliated by firing ballistic missiles at American military bases in Iraq. Some missiles hit, causing injuries but fortunately no deaths. The situation came very close to escalating to full-scale war at that moment. A similar incident could happen again in 2026. An Iranian missile test could be misinterpreted as an attack. An American military exercise could be interpreted by Iran as preparation for an invasion. An accident or incident involving American and Iranian forces in the Persian Gulf could escalate. Once a military conflict starts, it's very difficult to control its escalation. Both sides have weapons, both sides are on alert, both sides have military personnel with rules of engagement that authorize them to fire if they believe they're under attack. The presence of hypersonic missiles adds another layer of danger because they give less time for diplomacy, less time for de-escalation, less time for cooler heads to prevail. If a hypersonic missile is detected and confirmed to be an incoming attack, there's only minutes for a decision to be made. This is an incredibly dangerous situation. Let's also talk about what the implications would be if there were a military conflict between the United States and Iran. Such a conflict would be catastrophic, not just for the United States and Iran, but for the entire world. Global oil prices would skyrocket. About a third of global oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is between Iran and Oman. If there were a military conflict, Iranian forces could attempt to close or disrupt traffic through the strait, which would cause oil prices to spike globally. This would create economic problems worldwide, triggering recessions in many countries, causing unemployment, causing suffering for ordinary people. The global supply chain, which is already stressed, would be disrupted. Shipping companies wouldn't be willing to risk sending ships through the Persian Gulf if there's a war happening. This would cause shortages of goods around the world. The conflict would also likely draw in regional powers. If the United States attacked Iran, various Iranian allies and Shia militias would become involved. Iraq, where the United States has military forces, would become a battleground. Lebanon, where Hezbollah is based, could become involved. Syria, which has a significant Iranian military presence, could become a theater of conflict. Yemen, where Iranian-backed Houthi forces control territory, could see escalation. The entire region could become engulfed in conflict. American military forces would suffer casualties, potentially significant casualties. The USS Abraham Lincoln and other American military assets would be at risk. If Iran could successfully strike an American aircraft carrier with a hypersonic missile, it would be the worst American naval disaster since World War II. Such an event would kill thousands of sailors. It would be a tremendous shock to the American public. It would create enormous pressure on the Trump administration to respond with massive force, potentially including strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and other strategic targets. The escalation spiral could lead to a much larger war. Israel might take the opportunity to attack Iranian nuclear facilities. The United States might use the conflict as an opportunity to reshape the region. The consequences would be utterly devastating. So why haven't cooler heads prevailed? Why is the situation escalating rather than de-escalating? Part of the reason is that dialogue between the United States and Iran has largely broken down. The Trump administration withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in its first term, which was a major agreement that had been negotiated with international partners. Reopening that deal or negotiating a new agreement would require both sides to show willingness to compromise, and neither side currently seems willing to do that. The Trump administration is demanding that Iran halt its nuclear program entirely, that Iran halt its missile development, that Iran stop supporting proxy forces in the region, and that Iran accept international inspections and verification. Iran is demanding that the United States lift all sanctions, that the United States stop threatening military action, and that the United States respect Iranian sovereignty. These positions seem far apart. Additionally, both sides have domestic political incentives not to compromise. Any American president who lifted sanctions on Iran would be criticized by Republicans and by pro-Israel groups. Any Iranian leader who agreed to halt the nuclear program without getting significant concessions would be criticized by hardliners in Iran for selling out national interests. So both leaders are locked in a rhetorical position where backing down seems politically impossible. This is a tragic dynamic because it means that even if both sides would benefit from de-escalation, they can't politically afford to pursue it. Instead, the pressure builds, the weapons are developed, the military forces are deployed, and the risk of conflict increases. Looking at the broader strategic picture, we also have to consider Russia and China. Russia has been supportive of Iran, providing military technology, weapons, and diplomatic support. Russia views Iran as a counterweight to American power in the Middle East. If the United States were to go to war with Iran, Russia would likely provide additional support to Iran, perhaps including more advanced weapons systems. China also has interests in the region. China is dependent on Middle Eastern oil. If there were a conflict that disrupted oil supplies, it would harm China economically. China has also been developing relationships with Iran and would likely support Iran diplomatically, if not militarily. So a US-Iran conflict wouldn't just be a bilateral conflict between the United States and Iran. It could draw in other major powers and become a broader geopolitical catastrophe. This is another reason why cooler heads need to prevail. The risks are simply too high. But in the current environment of 2026, with the Trump administration taking an increasingly aggressive posture and Iran responding by accelerating its military development, the risks are escalating. The hypersonic missile development is just the latest manifestation of this escalation. As Iran develops more advanced weapons, American military planners become more nervous, which pushes them to recommend more aggressive postures, which pushes Iran to develop even more weapons. It's a dangerous spiral. So what's the path forward? How do we de-escalate this situation before it becomes catastrophic? The first step would be dialogue. The United States and Iran need to be talking to each other even if they disagree profoundly on fundamental issues. During the Cold War, when the United States and Soviet Union had the potential to destroy each other with nuclear weapons, they maintained dialogue. They had hotlines. They had diplomatic channels. Even when tensions were incredibly high, they kept talking. The United States and Iran need to establish similar channels if they don't already have them. Second, both sides need to recognize the mutual benefits of de-escalation. A war between the United States and Iran would be catastrophic for both countries and the entire world. Both sides would suffer tremendous losses. Iran's economy, already devastated by sanctions, would be destroyed by war. American military personnel would be killed. The global economy would suffer. Everyone loses in a war between the US and Iran. Third, there needs to be a negotiated resolution to the nuclear issue. The JCPOA wasn't a perfect deal, but it was a deal that many international experts believed was effective at limiting Iran's nuclear program. Some version of that deal, or a new deal with similar provisions, could provide a framework for reducing tensions. Iran would get sanctions relief, which its economy desperately needs. The United States would get verified constraints on Iran's nuclear program. This could be the foundation for broader de-escalation. Fourth, there needs to be international involvement. The United Nations, the European Union, regional powers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE all need to be involved in encouraging de-escalation. International pressure can help both the Trump administration and the Iranian leadership find a way to back down from their maximalist positions while maintaining domestic political credibility. None of these steps are easy. All of them require political will and leadership, but the alternative is continued escalation toward a war that could be catastrophic. The situation we're in right now in 2026 is genuinely dangerous. We have a Trump administration that's taking an aggressive posture toward Iran, an Iranian government that's responding by developing more advanced weapons, hypersonic missiles that could threaten American military assets, and diplomatic channels that are largely closed. We have risk factors for miscalculation, for accidents, for incidents that could spiral out of control. We have economic vulnerabilities, with global oil prices vulnerable to disruption, and global supply chains vulnerable to interruption. We have the potential for regional powers to become involved and for the conflict to spread. We have the potential for major powers like Russia and China to become involved. The stakes are incredibly high. This is why the situation deserves serious attention from American policymakers, from the international community, and frankly, from the American people. The decisions made in 2026 about how to handle Iran could have massive consequences for the next decade or more. A war with Iran would reshape geopolitics, would cost trillions of dollars, would kill thousands or tens of thousands of people, and would create instability that we would be dealing with for generations. On the other hand, a negotiated de-escalation could reduce tensions, could free up resources for domestic challenges, and could reduce the risk of catastrophic conflict. The Trump administration needs to seriously consider whether continued confrontation with Iran is in America's interest. The Iranian leadership needs to consider whether developing weapon systems that provoke American responses is sustainable. And the international community needs to support diplomatic efforts to de-escalate. The situation in 2026 is at a critical juncture. The path forward matters enormously. That's the situation with US-Iran tensions and Iran's hypersonic missile development in 2026. It's a complex, dangerous, and consequential geopolitical situation that deserves serious attention. I hope this video has given you a deeper understanding of what's happening, why it matters, and what the stakes are. If you found this analysis valuable and want to continue following the most important geopolitical developments, please hit that like button and subscribe to USA News. I'm covering the critical stories that mainstream media sometimes misses or oversimplifies. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts on US-Iran tensions. Do you think military conflict is likely? Do you think diplomatic de-escalation is possible? What do you think the Trump administration should do? I want to hear your perspective. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we continue analyzing the geopolitical forces shaping our world.